It was the kind of flashing red and blue light show that usually signals a felony in progress, the strobe effects bouncing off the aluminum siding of my detached garage like a disco ball from hell, illuminating the terrified faces of my bandmates as Patricia Sterling, the self-anointed queen of Crestview Heights, stood in her pristine, surgical white driveway screaming at 7. Count them, 7. Police officers that she wanted me in handcuffs immediately. All because my band, the Circuit Breakers, was quietly running through a set list for a charity gig to feed hungry families, playing at a volume lower than the lawnmower she dutifully ran at the crack of dawn every single Sunday. She looked like she was vibrating, her face a terrifying shade of plum, convinced she had finally won the war she started 2 years ago, having no idea that she wasn't watching my arrest, but rather the opening credits of her own spectacular, self-inflicted demise, a destruction so complete that people in our town would be talking about it for decades to come. To understand why a middle-aged woman would try to swat a garage band playing soft rock covers, you have to understand the battlefield that was Crestview Heights, and you have to understand where I was in my life when I walked into the line of fire. I'm Mason Clark, a 45-year-old master electrician who had recently retreated to my childhood home on Oakwood Drive after my marriage dissolved, leaving me with nothing but a bruised ego and a lot of empty time. This house was supposed to be my sanctuary, a 1960s ranch inherited from my grandfather, a place that smelled like old cedar and motor oil, specifically that comforting scent of WD-40 and sawdust that lingers in a workshop where honest work was done for 40 years. My grandfather had been the neighborhood fix-it guy back when neighbors actually spoke to each other without recording the conversation on an iPhone, and I hoped to find some of that peace, picking up the guitar during those sleepless 2 a.m. post-divorce nights, eventually teaming up with Leo Ramirez, a drummer down the street, and Elena Rossi, a bassist from 2 blocks over, to form the Circuit Breakers, a name that nodded to my trade and our collective attempt to restart our lives. We practiced on Saturdays from 2 to 5 p.m., strictly adhering to the city noise ordinance. Inside a garage I had soundproofed with heavy moving blankets until the output was barely louder than a spirited dinner conversation, creating a vibe that initially felt magical, like the summers of my youth, where neighbors like sweet old Mrs. Higgins would bring us iced tea in mason jars, and local teenagers would stop their bikes to listen to a few bars of Free Falanda. But I hadn't accounted for Patricia, a 52-year-old real estate agent with a shark smile and a terrifying abundance of free time, who patrolled the streets in a white luxury SUV with the vanity plate Queen Bee, treating the neighborhood not as a community, but as her personal fiefdom, where she was judge, jury, and executioner. Patricia's reign of terror was the stuff of suburban nightmares, a collection of petty cruelties that included measuring grass height with a literal ruler, timing how long people left their garage doors open, and once fining a single mother named Sarah Jenkins $400 because her kids drew hopscotch squares on their own driveway with washable chalk. She had driven the Thompson family out of the neighborhood with bogus architectural complaints, and she walked with the heavy, clicking stride of someone who has never been told no in her entire adult life. The first time she came for me, she didn't knock. She simply marched up the driveway with a clipboard and a decibel meter, announcing that my commercial activity violated Section 12.3 of the community standards, her manicured fingers stabbing the air as if accusing me of running a plutonium refinement plant next to a nursery. That confrontation kicked off a campaign of psychological warfare that was designed to make me sell the house and leave, starting with a morning where I woke up to find 5 separate violation notices tucked under my windshield wiper like parking tickets, citing me for grass that was a 1/4 inch too tall, a recycling bin placed out 6 hours too early, and unauthorized gatherings, totaling nearly $400 in fines for a single afternoon of music. Standing there in the morning dew, holding those slips of paper while Mrs. Higgins' coffee pot gurgled next door, I felt that familiar burn of helplessness. But Patricia had made a critical calculation error. She assumed that because I was an electrician who wore work boots, I didn't know how to read fine print, failing to realize that my entire career was built on interpreting complex code and safety regulations, and that when you push a tradesman who knows how to read blueprints, you better make sure your own foundation isn't cracking. I went to the county clerk's office that very afternoon, a dusty basement that smelled of bureaucratic despair, where a clerk named Barbara, who looked like she had seen every petty property dispute since the Nixon administration, pulled my file and revealed the first golden nugget of my defense. My grandfather had built that garage in 1962, and the original HOA covenant from the late 80s contained a specific grandfather clause protecting pre-existing mechanical workshops and related activities on my exact lot, meaning every single citation Patricia had written was not just wrong, but legally unenforceable. But I wasn't just looking for a shield. I was looking for a sword, and while poring over the survey maps of Oakwood Drive, my electrician's eye, trained to spot discrepancies in measurements down to the millimeter, noticed something peculiar about Patricia's prized, newly renovated driveway, specifically the way the concrete flared out toward the street, extending well past the property line marked on the official city survey. I went home and grabbed my laser measure and a traditional tape, waiting until she left for her Pilates class to do a quick check, confirming my suspicion that her pristine concrete extension encroached exactly 8.3 inches on a city property, a massive violation of municipal right-of-way codes which exist to ensure snowplows and emergency vehicles can pass, carrying a penalty that I looked up with trembling fingers. $150 per day, retroactive to the date of installation. A quick check of the building permits showed the work was completed 847 days ago, and I did the math 3 times because I couldn't believe the numbers staring back at me, realizing that Patricia Sterling, the woman terrorizing families over chalk drawings, was sitting on a cumulative fine of over $127,000. For the next 3 days, I felt like a kid on Christmas Eve, documenting everything with high-resolution photos, watching her white SUV patrol the streets while knowing I held a nuclear launch code in my pocket. But she wasn't done escalating, deciding to hit me with her version of a nuclear strike by calling the city building inspector to report an illegal commercial auto repair shop on my property. She showed up at 7:15 a.m. on a Monday with Inspector Tom Miller in tow, a weary man in a hard hat who looked like he would rather be cleaning septic tanks than dealing with Patricia's drama, as she gestured wildly at my grandfather's vintage tools and hydraulic lift, screaming that I was running a business, completely ignoring the fact that the only thing being manufactured in that garage was acoustic rock and brotherhood. Inspector Miller looked at the guitars, looked at the moving blankets, and then looked at the vintage tools with a sudden spark of interest, running his hand over the old hydraulic system and telling me, "Son, I haven't seen a lift like this since '78. This is a beauty," before turning to a fuming Patricia and informing her that possessing tools is not a crime and that there was zero evidence of commercial activity. But the real twist, the moment the universe decided to tip the scales, happened as they were walking back down the driveway. Inspector Miller, having 30 years of code enforcement experience, paused at the end of my driveway and squinted across the street at Patricia's house, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her decorative lighting and that expansive, encroaching driveway, his professional instincts triggering alarm bells that Patricia was too busy ranting to hear. When Inspector Miller handed me his card and whispered, "I'll have the report clearing you in a few days, but between us, you might want to watch the show across the street," I knew the tide had turned, yet Patricia was operating on that special kind of delusion reserved for dictators in their final days, convinced she was still untouchable even as the walls were crumbling. She escalated her attack by hiring a private sound engineering firm to set up microphones on her property line, a desperate attempt to catch us violating noise ordinances, forcing me to watch from my window as these poor technicians set up thousands of dollars of equipment to measure acoustic guitars being played at the volume of a library whisper. While she was distracted directing this symphony of pettiness, I was quietly uploading Inspector Miller's observations and my own photographic evidence to the city's code enforcement portal, attaching the survey maps and the timestamps, effectively lighting the fuse on a bomb that was sitting directly under her manicured flower beds. The timing could not have been more perfect because the annual Crestview Heights Community Safety Fair was scheduled for that coming Saturday, an event where every major city official, the fire marshal, the police chief, and the city council would be gathering at the Park Pavilion exactly 3 blocks away, meaning the entire municipal government would be within walking distance of her illegal driveway when the truth came out. But Patricia, sensing she was losing control of the narrative, decided to open a new front in the war by creating a Facebook group called Concerned Citizens of Oakwood Drive, posting shaky, vertically filmed videos of my garage with dramatic captions about industrial noise and neighborhood menace, trying to rally the troops against me. It was a tactical error of massive proportions because she underestimated how much the neighborhood actually hated her. Within 2 hours, the group was hijacked by the very people she tried to radicalize, with Mrs. Higgins posting a video of me fixing her porch light for free, followed by Elena sharing clips of our quiet practice sessions where you could literally hear the wind chimes in the background over the music. The page she built to destroy my reputation transformed into a fan club for the circuit breakers, filled with testimonials from neighbors who had been victims of her bullying. People like the Johnsons, the Millers, and old Mr. Henderson, turning her digital smear campaign into a public forum for her own villainy. While she was fighting a losing battle on social media, I was digging deeper, driven by a hunch that if she cut corners on the driveway, she probably cut them elsewhere. So I started pulling the public records on her renovation insurance claim from 2 years ago. My electrician's brain, wired to spot discrepancies in invoices, noticed that she had claimed $89,000 in storm damage for the renovation. Yet the actual permits and contractor receipts on file only added up to about $51,000 of legitimate work, leaving a gaping $38,000 hole labeled vaguely as landscaping and drainage improvements that, according to her own complaints filed with the city about poor drainage on her property, clearly didn't exist. She had essentially committed felony insurance fraud to fund a renovation that was illegal in the first place, and then documented her own crime by complaining that the fake improvements weren't working. Tensions reached a breaking point on the Thursday before the safety fair when I heard Patricia screaming into her phone in her front yard, something about harassment and lawyers, confirming that the city had finally started asking questions about the complaints I'd filed. Desperate and spiraling, she hired a private security guard to sit in a sedan outside my house, a tired-looking guy named Ralph who looked like he regretted every life choice that led him to guarding a suburban street from a middle-aged guitarist. I waved at him. He waved back, confused, having no idea he was a pawn in a game of 4D chess where his employer was already in checkmate. The morning of the safety fair arrived with a heavy, electric feeling in the air, the sky turning a bruised purple as storm clouds gathered, mirroring the absolute chaos that was about to unfold. Mrs. Higgins showed up at my door with a terrifyingly gleeful look in her eye, whispering that her friend at the county clerk's office had tipped her off. The city had opened 3 separate investigations into Patricia, one for the insurance fraud, one for the real estate license violations. Turns out she was using HOA fines to drive down property values before buying homes herself, and one for the municipal code violations. But Patricia had one final, desperate card to play, a move so audacious it almost commanded respect for its sheer insanity. At 12:30 p.m., just as the fire trucks were parking down the street for the fair, Patricia screeched into my driveway, slammed her car door, and marched up to me with a manic grin, shoving a manila envelope into my chest. An emergency restraining order she had filed that morning, claiming I was stalking her and demanding I be barred from attending any community events, specifically the safety fair. "Gotcha," she hissed, thinking she had just silenced me, thinking she had prevented the evidence from coming out, not realizing that in her haste to file the order, she had included dozens of photos she had taken of me. Photos of my guests, my license plate, my backyard, effectively handing me signed, notarized proof that she was the one stalking me. I looked at the papers, then at her, and said, "You really didn't read this before you filed it, did you?" But she was already strutting back to her car, convinced she had won, unaware that Detective Sam, my drummer's brother-in-law and a highly respected officer, had just pulled up in his unmarked car to go over our presentation for the fair. He watched the whole interaction, shaking his head as he stepped out, just in time for the grand finale of Patricia's meltdown. It was 1 p.m., exactly 30 minutes before the fair was set to open, when the sirens started wailing. Not the festive sirens of the parade, but the urgent, panic-inducing yelp of an ambulance racing toward our street. We watched in stunned silence as the paramedics pulled up to Patricia's house, where she was now lying on her front lawn, wearing a neck brace she must have ordered online, screaming that the industrial noise from my garage had startled her, causing her to fall down her front steps and sustain a catastrophic spinal injury. It was a performance worthy of a daytime soap opera, except for one glaring problem. Detective Sam had been standing in my driveway for the last 20 minutes, Witnessing the absolute silence of the neighborhood, and noting that she was walking perfectly fine in her high heels when she served me the restraining order less than half an hour ago, while she was being loaded into the ambulance, loudly demanding that the police arrest me for assault by decibel, she was simultaneously posting on the neighborhood Facebook page, "Assaulted by neighbor. Safety fare must be canceled. Dangerous noise levels." She was creating a digital paper trail of her own perjury in real time, unaware that her frantic calls to emergency services had actually triggered the one thing she wanted to avoid: the arrival of Chief of Police Henderson and Fire Marshal Davis, who diverted from the fair setup to investigate the reported emergency. Instead of canceling the event, her fake injury brought the highest authorities in the city directly to her front lawn, standing inches away from the illegal driveway that was about to ruin her life. The rain started to fall as we walked over to the community pavilion, a heavy, cleansing downpour that drove everyone inside, creating a captive audience of nearly 200 neighbors, city council members, and officials. When the time came for public comments, I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I simply walked up to the microphone with Detective Sam standing stoically behind me, and I laid it all out. I projected the photos of her stalking me. I held up the fraudulent restraining order, and then, with the fire marshal looking on, I presented the survey maps showing the 8.3-inch encroachment of her driveway, doing the math out loud. 847 days times $150, totaling over $127,000 in fines. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence where you can hear a pin drop, as I explained the insurance fraud, the fake invoices, and the real estate scheme. Mrs. Higgins stood up and told the story of her grandson's bicycle fine. Elena spoke about the harassment of the single mothers. The dam broke, and 2 years of suppressed anger washed over that pavilion, turning Patricia's carefully constructed image into mud. Chief Henderson took the microphone, his face grim, and announced an immediate, comprehensive investigation into every citation Patricia had ever issued, while the fire marshal declared her driveway an active public safety hazard that needed immediate remediation. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Patricia's fake injury claim collapsed the moment the hospital cameras showed her walking to the vending machine without her neck brace, leading to charges of filing a false police report. The insurance fraud investigation resulted in a federal indictment, leading to 18 months in prison and a restitution bill that wiped out her savings. But the sweetest moment, the image that is burned into my brain forever, happened 3 weeks later on a Tuesday morning. I stood in my garage, coffee in hand, watching a city crew with jackhammers tear up that illegal driveway, turning her monument of oppression into a pile of rubble while the neighbors sat in lawn chairs and cheered. Patricia sold the house at a massive loss and moved to a small apartment across town, somewhere without an HOA, while Oakwood Drive healed. The circuit breakers still play every Saturday, but now the garage door is open, the kids draw on the driveway with chalk, and the music drifts through a neighborhood that remembered how to be a community. It makes you wonder, though, in a world where people like Patricia can weaponize the police and the law against innocent people, how many tyrants are out there right now, ruling their little kingdoms because no one has checked the survey maps? How many bullies win just because good people are too afraid to do the math? Justice is sweet, but it shouldn't be this hard to get. What would you have done? Would you have moved, or would you have fought? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the trenches of suburbia. Stay safe, and keep the music playing.